And welcome back to KTN Sunday Night. Time for Checkpoint. The ouster of Egyptian President Mohamed Morsi on Wednesday by the Egyptian military and how the world reacts to this could set a dangerous precedent on the continent on the removal of governments. It begs the question, is a coup d'etat ever justified? That is the subject of our discussion tonight on Checkpoint. Well, in case you missed the troubling events of the week, here is a recap. Propped by the Muslim Brotherhood, President Morsi ascended to power as a democratically elected leader in Egypt following the Arab Spring. He has now been deposed. On Wednesday, the general said in an announcement read on state television that they were suspending the constitution and installing an interim government led by the chief of the Constitutional Court. Under President Morsi, Egypt showed signs that it might be sliding back in transition to democracy with arbitrary arrests, street violence, and the government's inability to embrace its opposition. The African Union has outrightly termed Wednesday's events a coup and suspended Egypt's membership. The US and the UK have been more cautious, urging for restraint and the speedy installation of a democratically elected civilian government. Now listen to what President Uhuru Kenyatta and US President Barack Obama had to say about the Egyptian crisis.
The Union has a very clear position on coup d'etats. Secondly, we did have an elected government, elected through a due democratic process. So what is happening currently in Egypt is indeed a matter of grave concern.
Democracy is not just about elections. It's also about how we're dealing with an opposition.
Well, joining us now is Professor Edward Kisiangani. He, of course, is our resident political analyst to my far right, and strategist Moses Kuria. Good evening to you both. Prof, is a coup ever justified?
Yes and no. Sometimes the leadership of different countries across the world push the people to the wall, to the point that they actually resort to changing government through the coup. Of course, all of us, we, as a civilized community of nations, we would like to change government through democratic processes. But when democracy is left to be defined by the leadership of a particular country to further their personal interests, then people resort to changing government through coups. And we have had people who have come to power through coups and changed the world in a way that civilian governments would not have done.
For instance? For
example, Egypt. You remember the turmoil, the tempest in Egypt in the 1950s when Gamal Abdel Nasser forced his way to power after the overthrow of King Farouk. Really, the modernization of Cairo and the superhighways you find in Egypt have come as a result for Gamal Abdel Nasser, who had a military background. So the progress of Egypt in that regard means that even if the coup could have been condemned at that time, it was justified because the kings had not done much. Even the Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi, when he took power in 1969, he did it because King Idris had failed to deliver, and most Libyans were poor. So for the start, I think Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi gave the Libyans an identity, and during his early years, he transformed Libya into a great
it starts as an emancipation, but then history tells us turns into something else, and some would say possibly Moses sets a bad precedent for that particular country to actually have stable governments.
Let me put it clear that people cannot cause a coup. People can cause a revolution or an uprising. A coup can only be caused by soldiers holding guns. So when the professor says that the people can resort to a coup, I think that's not very accurate, because when you look at what is happening in Egypt, it is soldiers who caused a coup. The people were out there in Tahrir Square, they were protesting. Hopefully they were trying to influence the democratic process. You remember that it's only, Morsi's government was supposed to celebrate 1 year in government in power this week. And that's a very short period of time to say that now a coup was justified. So a coup was not justified in Egypt, and a coup is not justified anywhere.
What about his failure to work with the opposition, the arbitrary arrests of opposition leaders, killings?
You see now what happened in Egypt is that somebody caused elections to take place without a post-Mubarak constitution. And all that you are fighting in Egypt was because of the weakness of the constitution. That things were done in a hurry, and the only party that was organized, the only forces that had some semblance of some structure was the Muslim Brotherhood. I do believe those are issues that could have still have been resolved within within political processes without getting the soldiers from the barracks.
And so to the original question, is a coup, in your opinion, ever justified?
Never justified, never justified. And if you remember that sometimes people persevere through very difficult situations, and the long term of not resorting to military rule, it pays off in the long term.
You know, first of all, Moses, I don't like the articles you have been doing in the press to defend this in
Prof, could we stick to the topic?
Yes, but you see, it is related to what he has been saying. I think I am not a Hobbesian in my thinking. I am a Lockean. My thinking emanates from what I read about John Locke. That is the principle that is adopted in the American Constitution. We hold these truths to be self-evident. And the truth that they're referring to are the right to liberty and of course life and the pursuit for happiness. We are not living in a world to tolerate people mistreating us. We are living in a world where we want to pursue happiness and have liberty. So we are not going to justify bad governance by just saying, let us wait until they change. In fact, in some of the works you have been writing, you give the impression that the problem is the United States and the West. Let us not divert our attention from what is happening in Egypt and forget about the problems that are facing the African people. Really, minus the West, was Morsi a good president? Is he doing a good job? Employing his relatives and friends and almost turning that country into an institution of Sharia law. If you focus on the issues that have caused the coup, then you remember that probably there is a problem to address. Let us not divert attention from the main issues. There have been other coups.
Moses, if picketing doesn't work, lobbying, etc., what are people to do?
You know, not everybody in America likes Obamacare. You know, the healthcare system of America. Do they resort to military coups in America because somebody doesn't like Obamacare? And the bottom line for me is
America any more the bastion of democracy?
You would argue, for me, the minimum criteria for determining a democracy is if that government was democratically elected by the people. And it is the people of Egypt who voted for Muslim Brotherhood. I don't like Muslim Brotherhood. I don't like Morsi. I was very depressed when Morsi came to power. But it is Egyptian people in their millions from all the regions of Egypt who voted for Morsi.
So in your opinion,
it is important that...
Moses, in your opinion,
yes.
A democratically elected government, a free and fair election is enough to constitute
it is enough,
a democracy.
That is what democratic
And regardless
process,
of what this government does later, whether it does an about turn on the precinct of which it was elected, that's fine.
If you don't like any government, wait for elections. Because we have done very well as a continent to overcome the culture of military coups. We've come from far. We only have now Mali, and now Egypt has joined that league. Are we going to say that every time we vote in a government democratically and willingly, then 1 year down the line we don't like it, then we resort back, to military coups?
Prof, is that what you're saying?
Do you remember the electoral malpractices that were in Egypt when Morsi came to power? When you talk about fair and free, in fact, that election was first of all a sham. And I don't expect a person of your education caliber to even give credit to that election. Then it brought in this man of the Muslim Brotherhood. And then America, for example, kept quiet. It didn't know what to do because the guy who had come had issues, and so it didn't.
But what is America to do with it if the people voted in that government?
I'm zeroing in as a reply to Moses, because I am privy to information Moses has been, giving to the press and media, and then saying things that are not actually acceptable to me. But I think let me come back such as the fact that the problem of Egypt is the West. And there is no issue in Egypt. He does not even appreciate that the price of bread has gone up. There are issues in Egypt that really affect the people. I expect Moses to address the problems that are Egyptian before we even think about the outside.
Let me put this clearly. In the article that Prof is alluding to, Yes, it's true that I have praised the ball on the West, and the West has been remote control in Egypt. That article was written before Mohammed al-Baradei was named to be the prime minister, which has happened today, and which I had predicted in my article that is what the Americans wanted. They just wanted a chance to put their own puppet. Yeah, the former IEA boss, Mohammed al-Baradei. They wanted a chance to put their puppet into power. And this puppet lost heavily in the last election.
Yes, but that's
so if Mohammed al-Baradei is man enough, why can't he go to the polls and face the people? He had a chance only a year ago. He lost heavily.
This is an interim administration. We are saying, why is this coup coming? Is it coming because we have issues that have not been resolved by the people of Egypt? You remember, even when the soldiers took the decision they took, there were mobs in the streets. You cannot overlook those people and say they had no...
Professor, let me rephrase the question. In your opinion, is there no unseen hand at play in Egypt? And do you not fear that governments, and I think it has even been written of the Arab Spring, that governments have been toppled at the behest of the West? You have an Africa command that can move in wherever by the US. Does it not worry you that foreign powers could topple democratically elected governments through coups? By the way, the US government most heavily funds the Egyptian military.
But Anne, you know what religious fundamentalism can do to this world? First of all, it was a mistake for Egyptians to have elected this man called Morsi.
How is it a mistake if it is a democracy? Aren't we saying that the point of a democracy is that people, right or wrong, pick their leader?
What happened is that Mubarak, who had served, remember Mubarak was the head of the Air Force. At the time during the time of Anwar Sadat, that Mubarak was the head of the Air Force. And somebody peddled lies that Mubarak, because he represents the West, bought anything that has ever done business with the West. And that is how the Muslim Brotherhood came to power. But when they took power, they started pushing the country towards religious fundamentalism and the Sharia law. We do not want this. We want a liberty. We don't want a world
it's interesting for you to say, given that we're not Egyptian citizens in the first place, should Egyptians not have the right to pick their leader? And that is the fundamental question here, that foreign powers could be at play within African democracies, that if they don't like someone, they could remove them.
Yes, but if you are going to organize an election under such circumstances, where a guy has come in and changed laws and he's almost become a pharaoh, actually, he was declaring himself an absolute leader. How can he organize fair elections? He only used elections to come to power and set up a dictatorship. And if you want to set up a dictatorship, who knows how to give commands apart from the military?
No, let me ask a question. Now, if the current ruling military...
Well, I hope you're asking, Prof.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just posing this for people to chew that. If the military dictatorship now becomes rogue again, who is going to overthrow them?
Yes, if the military, they can overthrow each other, because even within the military. Look here, if you look at the history of Africa, and we can have this going on and going on. If you look at the progress Africa has achieved in the past 50 years, 75% of that good progress is attributed to soldiers, not to civilian governments.
Well, when they built roads and delivered healthcare.
The civilian governments have failed in Africa. I do not know why. You see, they could talk about lofty ideas, Sekou Touré of Guinea. You could hear about Hoffa Bonye of Ivory Coast. You can hear about Seda Senghor of Senegal. They talk very well at the African Union.
Then why hold to democracy at all, Professor, if you think the military
is the way to go? We just want civilians to do the right job. Civilian governments must do the right job.
I agree with you. Let me rephrase it and put it this way.
Say something about the AU.
No, don't tell me what to say, Professor.
Yeah.
I run the show.
Yeah,
all
okay.
Right.
My apologies.
They're accepted.
Yes.
Let me put it this way,
yes.
and I'm just hunching off the question that Moses had put forward.
Yes.
Don't you think it is a dangerous position when in Africa the military remains the only trusted institution, and is it not more progressive than to invest heavily in other institutions?
That is now the crux of the matter. We must switch focus and start investing in our own institutions. But to do that, those who are holding leadership should do the right thing. The civilian governments in Africa have been a disaster. Look at the statements that have come from the AU, and that's why I was introducing it. They are very fast at telling people, look, we don't want coups. We don't want, they want status quo so that they can blunder, they can promote ethnic chauvinism, and they can promote poverty, and you keep quiet in the name of democracy. So really the investment should go, and the leaders who are listening across the African continent should now say, how can we be trusted? And they must work hard to be trusted by doing the right thing. Most of them don't do the right thing, and they cause the military to intervene because the military are earning money from taxpayers. So we pay them, and they reach a point where they say there is more insecurity at the homeland.
But are they, and my concern, and perhaps the question many people would have, is that they have no one to check on them.
The military have no one to check on them, but they have also been checking each other. You know, look at Nigeria in the 1960s. We started off with military officers. Gowon was overthrown by Murtala Muhammad. Then Obasanjo realized we have checked each other so much from 1966 to 76.
Isn't that a very bloody route you're advocating for?
I think in the struggle, if you look at what we have had in the world today, sometimes bloodshed is not something to be glorified, but when it comes, sometimes it makes people to think better. Most of these great democracies, China, the United States, have been founded on bloodshed. Simply, the word is this: military leaders across the African continent have let us down. When they take power, they domesticate the power, forget about people's problems, and when you complain about them, they tell you what? The quick solution is the West or somebody outside is interfering. They don't address the issues that have caused people to riot. And then they tell you, we are democratically elected, my people want me, and that is justification for dictatorship and abuse of power.
Moses.
I'm still trying to recover from the fact that Professor says that militaries can check on each other, that you should have a coup and a counter coup and elders. But if I had an indication of what the professor would say in this show, I would have carried for him a small gift, a calendar, just to remind him we're in the year 2013. You know, we are not in the year 1950 or 1940s that we can start glorifying military regimes, glorifying coups. We really need to, you know, to change
for lack of an alternative.
We need to change from the mindset of anarchy, because civilization and order, you know, are something that we have to live with in this modern age. You know, if you go to elections and you lose, you should live with the consequences. You know, I think that statement from Carlson has got, you know, some truth in it, that really choices have consequences. Because if you look at Egypt, it is the people of Egypt who voted for Morsi. And I think the democratic process, given it's, imagine, Anne, if the coup in 1982 in Kenya would have succeeded, much as many people had a problem with the Moi regime, imagine if that would have succeeded. Today, would we be sitting here? Can you look at me in the eye and tell me that the culture of coups and counter coups that Professor here is, would we have the country that we have?
Anne asked your question. He said, Moses, do you want to peg democracy on elections? If you had the statement by the American president speaking, he said that, you know, democracy is not just about elections. People win elections even fraudulently. But the really challenge begins on how you work with others, tolerate others, and be trusted.
But there's a
Tell
report,
me one
Professor,
African leader you can trust.
Professor, there's a report that has just been published in the New York Times.
And I hope these are really your winding up comments.
It is my winding up. A report has just been published a few minutes ago in the New York Post, saying that Dr. Susan Rice, the National Security Advisor to President Obama, actually gave the final authorization for the coup in America. You can go online, read that article. Tell me, is that the route that Obama is advocating for?
Professor,
when it is his own
was
government?
that an official statement? First of all, you cannot bring
we have to
media
wind it
reports
there.
here and say this is what you...
Well, I feel a little offended given that I'm a member of the Fourth Estate. Anyway, I thank you. I understand your points.
All right.
Gentlemen, it's always so good talking to you. We're so out of time. Forgive me. We must wind it up there. But they will both be online a little later. Our hashtag is checkpoint. That's one word. Go online for that conversation on Twitter. We take a short break. I'll be back with the sports.